Last Concord, it's come to my attention that only about 1/3 of the reports of petrol stretching that have been given to An Garda Síochána have been recorded by the Revenue Commissioners. And even though I've highlighted this particular discrepancy before, nothing seems to have happened. And it raises the question as to what priority the Revenue Commissioners are giving to the issue of petrol stretching in light of the devastating impact it's having on families and individuals who have had their vehicles destroyed.
I'm advised by the Revenue Commissioners who are responsible for tackling fuel fraud that they are very aware of the risk posed by to consumers' vehicles, legitimate businesses and the Exchequer by all forms of fuel fraud. Revenue has since last summer received reports from a variety of locations around the country of problems relating to petrol quality and suggestions that problems are attributable to petrol stretching. Petrol stretching involves the illegal addition of a low-tax commodity to petrol, and the motive of the criminals who engage in this activity is to profit from the sales of adulterated petrol, thereby defrauding motorists and the state. Revenue has received 141 complaints to date, the majority of which originated in the Revenue's border Midland West region. Every filling station about which a complaint was made has been visited by the Revenue Enforcement officers, and fuel samples taken from them have been sent for analysis to the state laboratory. 345 samples of petrol from filling stations and other sources have been referred to the state laboratory. The scientific analysis required is complex and time-consuming, and the state laboratory has conducted an extensive series of tests and retests on the samples. Despite this extensive testing, evidence of the presence of prohibited stretching agents has been found in only 2 samples, both from one location. The conclusive results received from those tests have resulted in the seizure of the product, and files are being prepared with a view to prosecution. Following a series of further tests conducted by the state laboratory, the results were received which indicate the presence of traces of road diesel in several samples taken from a variety of locations. This could indicate that petrol was contaminated with road diesel at some point in time. There is no rational economic reason or fraudulent incentive for anyone to mix normal road diesel with petrol. If the problems have come to light were caused by unintended contamination as a result of diesel being inadvertently mixed with petrol at some point along the supply chain, there would be no revenue offence involved. However, the Revenue Commissioners are investigating vigorously the possibility of tax fraud being associated with the identified problems. In any instances where the analysis of the samples by the state laboratory indicates the presence of illegal stretching agents in petrol, Revenue will take swift and robust action and pursue prosecutions against alleged offenders where possible. They have been working closely with An Garda Síochána on this matter and will continue to do so.
Thank you, Minister. I call Deputy Denis Naughten.
Minister, the fundamental problem here is that because there doesn't seem to be a loss to the Exchequer in relation to it, it's not really an issue for the Revenue Commissioners. Now, in my constituency and in the adjoining counties, we have families where there are 2 cars destroyed. In some cases, the replacement car has also been destroyed by this particular practice. Something serious went on here. Now, you've said, Minister, that there's 141 cases that have been reported to the Revenue Commissioners. The issue here is, Minister, close to 400 cases have been reported to An Garda Síochána. And we were advised that by Revenue that if the information was given to the Gardaí, that would then be passed on to the Revenue Commissioners. Now, can I ask you, Minister, first of all, how can the Revenue get to the source of the problem when up to 2/3 of the reports that have been made have not been actually looked at by the Revenue Commissioners? And will it not make it far more difficult to identify the source of the problem?
Thank you, Deputy.
And secondly, Minister, even though there may not be a loss to the Exchequer, will the Revenue Commissioners act in the interests of the motorists that have had their vehicles damaged and try and source the outlet and where this fuel came from in the first place?
Thank you.
Whether it's diesel that has been adulterated into it or some other contaminant.
Minister.
Yeah, but I think we must distinguish between what may have occurred as a result of negligence and what may have occurred as a result of fraud. And in the tests carried out by the Revenue Commissioners in the State Laboratory, 345 samples were tested. And only in 2 samples is there clear evidence of petrol stretching as defined. And there is no point, there's no economic point in mixing diesel with petrol. There is no economic advantage in that. And yet many of the samples have, the petrol is contaminated by diesel. Now, that is not petrol stretching. That something happened in the supply chain which caused the adulteration or the contamination. But there's no profit margin in that, or no profit motion in that. So the revenue are examining to see, is there any some kind of connection with tax? And they're examining that, but it's not quite clear that there is. Now, there's no doubt that something happened. There's no doubt that there was damage caused to a lot of individuals' cars. But there is not evidence that there was widespread petrol stretching as defined.
Thank you, Minister.
But there was widespread contamination of petrol, but with diesel.
Thank you. I'll go back to the Minister again.
Not with a low excise product to allow profit.
Deputy Naughten.
Here is the fundamental problem, Minister, and accept what you're saying. Because there's not, as you believe, fraud involved, it's not an issue for the Revenue Commissioners. The difficulty is that there is, at the very minimum, negligence involved here. Vehicles have been damaged. Economically, families have been decimated by this particular action. And the culprits need to be identified. If it is negligence, they are covered by insurance, and the insurance companies should kick in here. But if the Revenue Commissioners have only got 1/3 of the reports that have been presented to the Gardaí, how can they identify the source of this? Now, what I want from you, Minister, is an assurance here that Revenue will do everything it can to try and identify the source of the contamination, whether it be negligent or whether it be fraudulent, and that if the information cannot be used for a criminal prosecution, that information will be made available for a civil prosecution. And secondly, Minister, why have we still got a situation where we have two completely different standards for the recording of the deliveries of fuel, both petrol and diesel?
Thank you.
If those recording systems were similar, it would have been far easier at this stage to identify the source of the problem, trace it back, and ensure that people were adequately compensated.
Thank you, Minister, to conclude.
Yeah, I don't have the data to which the Deputy refers. It's news to me that complaints have been made to the guards about petrol stretching which haven't been passed on to Revenue. That's news to me. So you've raised it, but if you have a file on it, you might provide it, and we'll give it to the Revenue Commissioners, and we'll let them investigate if there's a way to investigate. But the point, one of the central points in the answer I've given is that if there is no fraud, or if there is no intention of fraud, then it's outside the legal powers of the Revenue Commissioners. I mean, they pursue fraud, they pursue criminal offences. If there's no evidence of a criminal offence, and if it looks as if there was a contamination of a petrol supply by the addition of diesel, where there is no obvious profit motive, well, then that's a different issue, and it's not in the revenues. It's not for the revenue.
Thank you, Minister. Okay. Sorry, we have to go on to the. Sorry,
it's not of the revenue to start.
We have to move on to the next question. Deputy